Okay, we're on Zion Omid base 7b. Apologies, we didn't have a share last week, so just a reminder with the previous time. We saw here in the middle of the page, Amar Abaya. You all see that? Rabbi Abaya said, Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shammai, Rabbi Eliezer, Acherim, Kulu Sevir Lahu, Sukkah, Diras Keva Ba'inan. All of them, says Abaya, are of the opinion that a sukkah has to be a permanent dwelling, meaning it has to be constructed in a way that it would be considered to be permanent. And we saw Tosfos last time. Tosfos said here, although it says all of them, it's quite a sweeping statement. Says Tosfos, Kulu Svira Lahu Sukkah Diras Keva Ba'inan. Al Koch Ein Shavin. He says the truth is we're forced into saying actually when it means they all are of the opinion that it should be a permanent dwelling, they're not equal in their definition of that. So in theory they agree that it should be in some way permanent, but in practice they would disagree as to how that would be. Says Tosfos Rebbe by Dalet Amos. For Rebbe, that would be that the sukkah needs to be at least 4 amos square. Rabbi Shammai Sagi because they Roshim Ruba Vishulchana, whereas Rabbi Shammai would say as long as your head and the majority of your body is in this and your table is in the sukkah, it would be a kosher sukkah. So what we see that all of those had differing opinions as to what is defined as keva, as fixed, permanent, and what would be considered to be arai, temporary, and therefore possible. We're going to pick up on the last opinion, which was that of Acherim, Rebbe Meir, and it's down here. Acherim Omrim, Sukkah Asur Kashovach Pasula. Says Rebbe Meir, a sukkah which is made like a dovecote, which means it's round, is possible. I think there's Rashi there. Yeah, it says Rashi, Kashovach, Agula, round. Pasula, why? Lefi she'ein la zavius. Because, says Rebbe Meir, a round sukkah is possible because it doesn't have corners. Now, I think what he means by this is that since it doesn't have corners, you wouldn't build a diras keva. You wouldn't build a permanent structure without corners.
Not like a wigwam or a teepee or something.
Yeah, surely exactly.
they are permanent, no?
Well, I mean, the tents are by definition temporary, aren't they?
Well, they're not necessarily tents, as in you can get like properly, proper wooden structures right. of these kind of things. Like a sukkah is also it can be wooden or.
Yeah. True. But it would appear that Rebbe Meir is of the opinion, and we don't actually pass him like that. But he would say it needs to have corners, because otherwise it wouldn't be considered to be. And we don't pass him like Diras Keva anyway. We don't say that the sukkah has to be permanent; it has to be temporary. So he would say no, unless it's got corners, it's not considered. It's considered to be temporary and therefore possible. Having said that, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is where we were up to. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Sukkah hasir kivshan, a sukkah which is constructed like an oven." And again, if you look at Rashi says, "Kivshan agula delei ka acherim." Interestingly. So he's agreeing that the construction is circular, but the Gemara is now bringing Rabbi Yochanan because he disagrees with Acherim, with Rabbi Meir. And you'll see here the diagram in the Gemara is not so we understand what a circle is, but this is like looking down on a kivshan, an oven. Types of kivshans they have would be open at the top like that, like a stove pot, like an open stove. Then we have like slanting walls or maybe straight walls with a fire inside it, with the whatever material they were burning inside it, and the pot would sit on top of it. So looking down, that's what it would look like. So if it's constructed in that way, it says Rabbi Yochanan, Suga Suka Kivshan, Im Yesh Baha Kifa Kadei Leishe Ba Chavdala B'nei Adam Keshera V'im Lav Basula. A sukkah constructed like this circular oven, if its circumference is big enough that it could seat 24 people, so sitting in a circle, 24 people, kashera, that would be kosher, meaning if it's big enough to accommodate 24 people sitting side by side in a circle on the inside of that circle, it's kosher. V'im lav pasula, but if not, it's possible. Now just look at Rashi, and I'm going to say here before we go any further that this bit of Gemara is going to stretch my mathematical abilities perhaps to the limit and beyond, because we're actually looking at diameters and circumferences and circles in squares and squares in circles and calculations like that. Let's see how we get on. Says Rashi, Kadele Sheba B'chulei. You see, Kadele Sheba B'chulei Sevivois Hakifa Mibifnim. Says Rashi, so sitting round the circumference of the circle on the inside of the circle. Says the Gemara, Kaman. Whose opinion does Rabbi Yochanan follow? Says the Gemara, meaning in terms of these other definitions of a permanent sukkah, or dimensions of a sukkah. Says the Gemara, Rebbe. He's like Rebbe. We saw on Gimel Amud Aleph, Rebbe said that the minimum size of a sukkah is Daled Amos by Daled Amos, 4 by 4. To Amar called sukkah she'ein ba arba amos ala arba amos basula. Because Rebbe said any sukkah which is doesn't have 4 amos by 4 amos squared is possible. Look at Rashi. Command, who's it according to? By Rabbi Yochanan sukkah gedola kol kach. Rebbe. So Rabbi Yochanan requires the sukkah to be as large as Adaz Rebbe. To Amar Dalad Amos Ba'inan, who says we require the sukkah to be 4 amos square. Bit me, says Rashi. Actually, it's a question. What I'm saying is, who does he follow? Does he really follow Rebbe, who needs it to be 4 by 4? And we'll see why that the Gemara is asking that question. Is it really like Rebbe? Dal kolcha leislan tana de mafish bishura de sukkah gavasei. Because the truth is, there's no other Tana teacher of the Mishnah who requires such a large, or increases the size of a sukkah like this. Because we said 7 tefakim is the minimum we've said. Rabbi Yochanan kulei says the Gemara, says Rashi, this is Gemara's question. Does Rabbi Yochanan really require it to be this big? Aliba demana amra. So who's he going according to? So let's have a look. So says Gemara, Rebbe, like Rebbe who says that the sukkah needs to be 4 by 4, and if not, it's possible. Says the Gemara, if we up from the bottom, we could dig. Well, let's see then. Let's try and work this out. Gavra ba'amasa yasif. We know that a person sitting down occupies the space of 1 amma. Yeah? So 24 people sitting side by side requires 24 ammas in circumference. Says the Gemara, Kol sheyesh b'hakifa shalosh tefachim, yesh bo rochev tefach. Now this is where we get into the maths. It says any circle, let's say, any circle which has a circumference of 3 tefachim has a diameter, a width of 1 tefach. Yeah? So let's have a look at this circle here. So if this circle has a circumference of 3 tefachim, its diameter would be 1. Agreed? So we have a ratio of circumference to diameter of 1 to 3. Yeah? Which is very much what we say is pi, yes? Okay. Look at Rashi. So called Echa Makoma Amma Nims, says Rashi. But Amasa Yasif, so each person takes up a space of 1 amma. Kol echad mekomoi ama. Each person takes up his place is an amma. Nimsa kifa chafdalet amas. So we see that the circumference is going to be 24 amas. The kaimalan we established in the Gemara in Eruvin. Called igol sheish b'hakifa gimel tefachim yesh b'roich lo tefach. The Gemara there established that any circle which has a circumference of 3 tefachim has a diameter of 1 tefach. And this is actually based on a posuk in Divrei Hayamim base. When the posuk says that Shlomo b'yam she'asa Shlomo, so the pool that Shlomo made, eser ba'ama misvasoi al svasoi, it was 10 amas from one bank to the other, so one side to the other. Agul saviv, and it was surrounded. V'kav shloshim ba'ama, and its circumference was 30 amas, which is the ratio, right? If it's 10 across, then its circumference is going to be 30. So the diameter is 10, the circumference is 30. Hekev alma hachinami. We're going to see betray asa. Rush is going a little bit ahead a bit of what it is. Betray asa nami betray sa amos hekev sagi to nahave pose arba. So we actually will see that if Rebbe says you need a sukkah to be a minimum of 4 amas wide or long, then if you were to say, so let's say from here to here has to be 4 amas according to Rebbe, and then we know the ratio is 1 to 3, so 4 diameter to get the circumference times it by 3 would be 12. How many people would you need to sit around? If each person takes up an amma,
12.
Thank you, Johnny. Brilliant.
My maths is excellent tonight.
Yeah, as I said, this is we're just within the limits of my maths at the moment. Yes, says right, and that's the last 2 words on the page. Says the Gemara, betray sasagi. So if you're going to say that we're like Rebbe, and Rebbe says you need 4 ammas of your width of your sukkah, and if when it comes to a circular sukkah, we know that the ratio of diameter to circumference is 1 to 3, then 4 times 3 is 12. You only need to be able to have 12 people around here, not 24. So it can't be like Rebbe. Now here's something fascinating, because as we know, 3, saying it's a ratio of 1 to 3 is actually not quite accurate, because we obviously know that pi is 3.1415, yes? Etc. However, listen to this. This is fascinating. So we saw in Rashi uses the word here, what was for the posuk, v'kav. V'kav being like the circle around. So in fact, in the posuk, the word v'kav, there's a kri kasiv in that posuk in Divrei Hayamim. The kri, the way it's written, is v'kav. However, it's written, so it vav, kuf vav. However, it's written kuf vav hey. So what is kuf vav? 106. Yeah, kuf is 100, vav is 6, 106. Whereas the gematria of kuf vav hey is 111. If you were to put 106 over 111 and then bring it down to its, what do they call it, the smallest possible fraction, that would be 3 over 3.15. 3.1415. Pretty amazing, hey?
I mean, was it Hirsch that said you can learn something like maths and science and history from Gemara or something?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. They knew it. Of course they knew it. Rebbe knew it as well. All they're doing was he wanted to keep it in whole numbers which were easily divisible. Okay, but he knew that this was an approximation, just approximation for ease of reference.
Rabbi,
okay. Yeah.
Fractions can't have decimals in it.
No, you're right. Sorry, you're right. But you're right. I didn't mean it as a fraction. Sorry, what I meant was that if you were to divide, let me just check. Let me check I got this right. 106 divided by 111. That doesn't work. Try the other way around. Okay. Sorry, I missed it. What I meant was this. I'll read my notes again. The ratio of 106 to 111 is the same ratio of 3 to 3.1415, meaning the discrepancy between 106, the word kav, and kaveh, kufav hey, to what is 111, the ratio of difference between them is the same ratio of difference between 3 and 3.1415. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Okay, so at the moment, we're not sure who Rabbi Yochanan goes like, because if you say it's like Rebbe requires it to be 4 amas width, diameter, and yet we know if we were to times it by 3, that would give us a circumference of 12, and therefore we're way out. So turn over to Ches Omid Aleph. Says the Gemara, Hanimili be'igula. So yeah, you're right. You're right, those dimensions work when you're talking about a circle. Look at Rashi, top right-hand corner. To Bahakif Gimel Ikirav Tefach. That when you have a circumference of 3, you have a diameter of 1. That works with the circle. That calculation works with the circle. Avar berevua ba'itafei. But when you're talking about a square, actually you need more. The ratio of 1 to 3 is not sufficient. Why? Because if you think about it, look here. When we measure the diameter of a circle, we measure from its widest point. Yeah, so from here to here, the ratio is 1 to 3. But if you were to measure it from here, can you see the cursor? Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you. So if you measure it from here to here, that's a shorter distance. And therefore the ratio is not going to be 1 to 3, it's going to be less. Whereas when you measure a square, ignore the circle for a moment around it. I mean, do it over here if you want in Tosfos. When you measure a square, let's say, for example, there is a circumference of a square, meaning to go all the way around the outside of it. It doesn't matter whether you measure it from. If you measure it from here or here or here, it makes no difference. The diameter is always going to be the same. And therefore, the ratio of the circumference to the diameter is actually going to be greater than it is going to be with a circle. Does that make sense? Yeah, look at Rashi. It says Rashi, Be'igula, Rochav Tefach Yeshba. So when it comes to a circle, the diameter is a tefach. Igul, but that's with a circle. Igul ein rochba ela be'emso. Says Rashi, the diameter is only in the middle, meaning its maximum diameter is only ever at its middle. But we require it to be 4 amas square. Shi'aba besideha, koma be'emsa, virbua. Just as it is in the middle, so will it be close to the edges as well. And therefore, and therefore, the circumference of a square, theoretically, requires greater ratio. So therefore, maybe Rebbe is right to say 24. So back in the Gemara, so Hani Mili be'igula aval be'regua ba'itafei. So it's okay to say the ratio is 1 to 3, and therefore you only need 12 amas of circumference for it to be a kosher sukkah according to Rebbe. But when it comes to a square, you're going to need more. Says the Gemara on the second line, Mikadi kama mruba yotze al ha'igula. Okay, let's see how much more is a square than a circle. So says the Gemara, Revia. It's a quarter. The circumference of a square is a quarter more than a circle. Okay? That makes sense? Okay? Says Gemara. So it's a quarter more. Okay, what's a quarter more than 12? I'm doing the math here as well, okay? Says Gemara, third line, Veshesta, Sagi. That would be enough for 16. Yeah, a quarter more of 12. Quarter of 12 is 3. Yeah? No. 3, yes.
4.
A quarter of 12 is 4.
Sorry, I was wrong.
Thank you. So my son is, yes, I thought 3. The only reason I'm hesitating is because 3 plus 12 is 15, not 16. I think the Gemara is rounding it up. Yeah? Okay, so it would be 15, right? But the Gemara is going to round it up and say, let's say it's 16. Hikav Sagi. It's going to be enough. Even 16 is going to be enough, right? It's true. If it's a quarter more, it's going to be 15. But let's say 16. Here, let's say 16. Keep it to a nice, a divisible number. Even 16 is going to be plenty. So for Rebbe's round sukkah to be kosher, he would only need to be able to sit 16 people around it, not 24. So even now, even if you're going to say we're talking about the square, it's still going to be off. Says the Gemara, Hani Mili be'igol denafik migoi rivui. That was talking about a circle which is inscribed inside a square, the first diagram, right? The first diagram, excuse me, excuse me. To say you only need 16 is sufficient when you've got a circle inside a square. Look at Rashi. Hanimili. The sagi b'shisasa mehai timer to meruba yotze ala igel rivi. Because the reason we said that a square is greater than a circle by a quarter. Let's Rashi. Be'igula denafik migoi rivi. What we're talking about there about a circle inside a square. Im hikifas b'chut shel tezayin amar b'karka b'revia timsa b'tocha abba merubayos. If you were to take a thread, if you were to measure the circumference of this circle inside a square, you would need a thread of 16 amas. And therefore you'd find Timsa B'tocha Abba Murbaos. You'd find 4 square. Ata Ugloi B'chut Yud Beis. V'nimsa Chitson Yese Alap Nimi. However, if you say we're saying that on the inside, it would be less than on the outside. Afkan Imahisamu V'os Sukkah Zu Daya Lios Kadeshios V'Behakifa Shisha Asa Bnei Adam. And therefore, with this sukkah inside this circle inside a square, it would still be sufficient to have 16 people sitting at it. And that would still give you the 4 by 4. That's the case. Says Gemara, however, Aval, Ribui, the Nafik, Migoi, Agula, Bai to Fei. However, the next one, if you were to put the square inside a circle, actually, you would require a greater circumference. Why? Mishum Morsha de Karnasa. Because of the Morasha de Karnasa, because of the extension of the Karnasa literally means like the horns, the crowns, the corners. Because you've got these square corners fitting into a circle, as we know, obviously the circle narrows as it gets towards the outer parts of it, and you need it to be 4 at all points, you need to expand the circle in order to encompass all four corners of the square. So you couldn't put a 4 amma by 4 amma square in a circle of the same size, because it wouldn't fit. The corners would stick out. Agreed? Says the Gemara, let's see, kol amasa berebua amasa utrei chumsha ba'asrona. Therefore, what we find is that each amma in the square is an amma and 2/5. At the Ba'al Chasona is the diagonal. So if you were to measure from there to there, from that point to that point, or that point to that point, in a square, it is 1 1/4 times the length and width. Is that right? Okay, no one's disagreeing. That's good. Okay, but it's going to be bigger, isn't it? So it's going to be, it's going to be 1 1/4, sorry, 1 second, Rabbi Amsa utrei chumsha, 1 amma and 2/5 bigger at the diagonal. Says the Gemara, okay, that's the case. B'shivsa nechi chumshe sagi. Okay, even that, if that's the case, even with a square inside a circle, and you obviously need a bigger circle for that, you still be sufficient to have 17 less a fifth, which is 16 4/5. Why? Because you've got the diameter of from here to here would be 5 3/5 times 5 3/5 times by 3 is 16 4/5. Take my word for it. Okay, so we round it up to 17. That 16 4/5. Let's say 17. That's going to be enough. So we're still way off Rebbe's calculation of 24. So even if you want to say we're talking about a square inside a circle, and therefore the diameter is greater, and by the circumference times by 3 is going to be, it still takes us only to 17. So how does Rebbe say it's 24? Says the Gemara, Lord Duck. Rebbe wasn't being precise. Yeah, he was giving an approximation of the circumference. Yeah, he knew. Look, again, we go back to it. Rebbe knew all these calculations. Yeah, he knew how to make these calculations. He knew that 24 was bigger than necessary, but he wasn't being precise. Suggests the Gemara. Gemara rebuts that immediately and says, "Amor da'amrinan lo dak." Do you really say that he was not being precise? Purta. You can say that when it's a little bit. Okay, as I said, 16 4/5 to 17, let's say. So a tiny fraction, we can say he wasn't being completely precise. If you look at Rashi, a bit further down, this idea of lo dak, of not being precise, right in the middle of the wide lines. Lo dak here. Rabbi Yochanan ben Milsei l'samsein. Rabbi Yochanan, when he was reducing the numbers, V'amar tefei, he said more to chol kama da'ave gedola tefei adifa. Because we always try and round up. It's always better to have more, say more than less. But even so you can't round up from 17 from 16 4/5 to 24. And that's what the Gemara says. So a little bit, yes, you can say, okay, it wasn't being totally precise. Lord Dark. Amo da Aminu Lord Dark. Purta. You can say that he wasn't being precise. We're talking about a small amount. About Tuva mi Amrina Lord Dark. But when we're talking about a large amount, can we really say he wasn't being precise? So says the Gemara, Amalei. So Amalei ma kashisha berei de Rav Chisda the Rav Ashi. So Rav Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Asi, Misrat Gavra ba'amasa Yasid. Oh, hold on a second. Let's question the whole initial assumption. We started off by saying that a person sitting occupies the space of one amma. Says the Gemara, actually, no, that may not be the case, really. Perhaps it's not the case. Perhaps Talasa Gavre Bertate Amasa Yasre. Perhaps three people, Talata Gavre Bertate Amase. 3 people occupy 2 ammas. Okay? So what does each person occupy? So Talata Gavre, 2 people occupy 3, so 1.5 ammas each, right? Yeah? No, so it's the other way around, sorry. It's 2 divided by 3. 0.6 of an amma. Yeah, each. So it's less. Just over half an amma each. 3 people in 2 ammas. Yes, so it's obviously going to be smaller space. So kama havelahu sheitasa, says Gemara. If that's the case, then you only need 16 ammas, not 24 ammas. Yeah? Let's try and work this out. Yeah, if 24 people equals 16 ammas, that's 24 times 2/3. Yeah, 2/3 of an amma. If each person occupies 2/3 of an amma, then 24 people only require there to be 16 ammas. Okay? Anan shivsan nechi chumsha ba'inan. And we require there to be shivsa 17 ammas less a 5th. Okay, because that's more precise. Says Gemara Loda. Says, well, no, we're not being precise. Says Gemara again. Emo da aminan Loda. Do you really say he's not being precise? L'chumra, when it ends up being something more stringent. L'kulami aminan Loda. Okay, when it's something stringent, you can say he's not being precise, meaning he's rounding it up. He's being a bit more stringent. But when it comes to being lenient, do we really say he's not being precise? He's making a smaller measurement rather than the large measurement. So Amalei Rav Asi the Rav Ashi Le'olam Gava Ba'amasa Yasid. There's no truth, is no. The truth is, a person actually does take up an amma when sitting. Rabbi Yochanan Makom Gavre Lok Chashiv. But Rabbi Yochanan was not considering about where the person sat. Meaning, look at Rashi. What does that mean? He wasn't thinking about where the person sat. Well, this is about Rashi. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan Makom Gavre Lok Chashiv here. But Toch HaSukkah. Rabbi Yochanan wasn't talking about people sitting inside the sukkah as the way of measuring how big it should be. Rather, he was talking about sitting or surrounding it from outside. Lo shiva. Yeah. Go back in the Gemara. So says the Gemara, okay. Kama havu. So how much do we need? Says the Gemara, Tamne Tsare. We need 18 ammas. Yeah, why? Because we go back to our calculations that you'll need 18 people. So therefore, it's going to be a a circle which has a diameter of 6 amas, which would 3 times that will be a circumference of 18. Says the Gemara, however, the truth is, we only really need 17 less a fifth. We don't need 18. Says the Gemara, so here, you're right. We only need 17 and less a fifth. So 17 and 4/5. Why do we say 18? So we say, to be a bit stringent, there we can say he's not being precise. Yeah. Look at Rashi. When we're being stringent, we can always add a little bit to it. Says Rashi, Shahusif Ma'at Avashir. To add a little bit to the measurement. Veloy Simsamoi, we don't reduce it. We add a little bit. We don't extend it more than the measurement. But only we only extend it by 2/5, which is a third. Which is a third of 6/5. 6/50. Which adds to the circumference. Yeah, Veleka la'ukshe la'el tuba miloda. And we don't ask what we asked above. We talk about a large amount. We're saying he's not precise when it comes to a large amount. Here we're talking a really small amount. Yeah, it's a diameter. The exact diameter is 5 3/5, and we are rounding it up to 6. 6 times 3 is 18, and that's what we land on. Okay. Yeah. Says the Gemara, Rabbanan de Kesare v'amrele dayanid Kesare. So the rabbis of Caesarea, or some say the judges of Caesarea, Amri, they say, Igula de nafik migoi ribui river. We're talking about a circle which is inscribed within a square. Look at Rashi, last Rashi on the page. Ribuya. The Igula Migoi Ribui River, Mafik min Haribua, She'ata Ogel Es Hamaruba Mitochoi. So the circle is placed within the square, and when the circle is in the square, then we measure the square within it. Okay, turn over onto Ches Omid base. Okay. Yeah. Says the Gemara, Ribui, the Nafik, Migoi Igula Halga. When you've got the square which is inside a circle, that's going to be smaller by a half. It's going to be a half smaller than the circumference of the circle which is contained within. Yeah, remember we said because a square has the 4 corners which protrude, and therefore it needs to be the circle needs to be bigger by, what did we say? By a quarter in order to contain it. So the other way around, we would need to, in order to contain a square in a circle, we'd have to increasing the size of the circle, we'd have to reduce the size of the square by a half in order to accommodate it in the square. And says the Gemara, Velohu, but that's not the case. So we see that the circumference of that circle is not that great. It's not as big as that. Look at Rashi. The final of the white lines in Rashi on the left-hand side. Because we haven't seen the measurement like this. Rather, we find that the diameter is like the measurement of the diagonal of the square. As we said before, and every amma in a square is an amma and 2/5 as its diagonal. So a square, if you take the diagonal, whatever the length and width of the square is, the diagonal is going to be greater than it by 1 2/5 of an amma. Okay. Any questions on that? You still there? Anyone there? Hello?
No questions, Rabbi.
Oh, good. Good. Does that make sense?
I think so.
You think so, yeah. Yeah, I think so as well. I told you, it's really stretching my abilities in maths. Perhaps in Gemara as well. Yeah. The diagonal, I'm just looking at some of the diagrams I've written in my Gemara. If you've got a square 4 by 4, the diagonal in it is going to be 5 3/5. And therefore a circle which has a diameter of 5 3/5, its circumference is going to be, how did you find so it's 5.6.
It would be 5 3/5 times pi.
Yeah, which is 16.8, roughly. Yeah, round about 17, probably 17 and a bit. Yeah, let me make more accurate then. So it's 5.6 times by 3.1415, 17 and a half. Yeah, and that's why we've rounded up to 18. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm now going to go and lie in a darkened room with a headache after this. The Gemara is going to move on to something a little more simpler next time. Talking about a sukkah within a sukkah. If you were to think about having to put a mezuzah on, which one would you put mezuzah on? We'll see. We'll leave it. The place to stop is at these 2 dots. Okay.